Hello, this is Chris Wilhelm, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, April 17th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our first article, Hegseth again threatens attacks on Iran's civilian infrastructure. The U.S. blockade of shipments through the Strait of Hormuz would last for as long as it takes, the Defense Secretary said. By John Ismay. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Thursday renewed his threat to attack Iran's electrical infrastructure if the ceasefire between Washington and Tehran failed. Our forces are maximally postured to restart combat operations should this new Iranian regime choose poorly and not agree to a deal. Mr. Hegseth said during a briefing to reporters at the Pentagon, "We are locked and loaded on your critical dual-use infrastructure, on your remaining power generation, and on your energy industry. We'd rather not have to do it," he added, "but we're ready to go at the command of our president and at the push of a button." Under international law, intentionally targeting a country's energy infrastructure could constitute a war crime. Standing next to Mr. Hegseth, General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said that U.S. forces were postured and ready to resume major combat operations at literally a moment's notice. The two officials then discussed the U.S. naval blockade of ships traveling to and from ports in Iran. President Trump announced the blockade on Sunday after peace talks with Iranian leaders ended without a breakthrough. Under international law, a naval blockade is an act of war. Mr. Hegseth said that the blockade would last for as long as it takes, and that if Iran chooses poorly by not agreeing to a deal with the United States, then they will have a blockade, and bombs dropping on infrastructure, power, and energy. The Defense Secretary also called out journalists who are reporting on the war, comparing them to the Pharisees who criticized Jesus of Nazareth for performing miracles. The Pharisees scrutinized every good act in order to find a violation, Mr. Hegseth said, only looking for the negative. He then referred to the rescue of two downed F-15 aircrew members in Iran over Easter weekend as miracles. In a description of the naval operation in the Gulf of Oman, General Kane said Navy warships would enforce the blockade inside Iran's territorial seas, as well as in international waters. Furthermore, he said, naval forces under U.S. Indo-Pacific Command would actively pursue any Iranian-flagged vessel or any vessel attempting to provide material support to Iran. This includes dark fleet vessels carrying Iranian oil, the general added. Displaying a map of the Gulf of Oman, General Kane offered the first visual clues as to where the operation was taking place, showing about a dozen Navy destroyers on station more than 400 miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz, outside a blockade line running from Oman to Iran's border with Pakistan. The general explained that multiple warplanes, helicopters, and intelligence aircraft were operating in the skies above the destroyers to assist in the blockade. He then recited the warning that destroyer crews give to any vessels trying to run through the U.S. blockade. Do not attempt to breach the blockade. Vessels will be boarded for interdiction and seizure transiting to or from Iranian ports. Turn around or prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply with this blockade, we will use force. General Kane said that warning had been issued to more than a dozen vessels, all of which, he said, then turned around. U.S. destroyers could potentially fire warning shots at any ships that did not comply, he said. Admiral Brad Cooper, the leader of Central Command, joined the briefing to discuss two trips he had made to the Middle East from his headquarters in Tampa, Florida. He said that U.S. forces in the Middle East, which Central Command controls, were rearming and retooling during the ceasefire. House votes to preserve deportation protections for Haitians, rebuking Trump. The action was largely symbolic since the president would be all but certain to veto the bill, but the bipartisan vote reflected resistance within his own ranks on his signature issue. By Michael Gold. The House on Thursday defied its own Republican leaders and passed a bill that would force the Trump administration to extend temporary humanitarian protections for Haitian migrants in a bipartisan rejection of President Trump's effort to end them. The move was largely symbolic, given that Mr. Trump would be all but certain to veto the bill. His administration last year terminated the deportation protections, known as Temporary Protected Status, or TPS, for more than 350,000 Haitians who, under the program, were allowed to live and work legally in the United States. But its passage by a vote of 224 to 204 was a striking election year rebuke of Mr. Trump from members of his own party on immigration, one of his signature issues. The legislation came to the floor only after several Republicans from politically competitive districts broke with their party and joined Democrats to force a vote. Ultimately, 10 Republicans and 1 independent who caucuses with them joined Democrats to push it through. Mr. Trump's move to end the protections, part of his border crackdown on immigration, is under review by the Supreme Court, after lower courts sided with Haitian immigrants who accused the administration of ending the program illegally. Since 1990, the U.S. government can provide temporary protective status to migrants from certain foreign countries to allow them to remain in the United States for about 18 months if a crisis like an earthquake or a violent conflict would make it unsafe for them to return home. When a country loses that status, those migrants can be deported. Haitians were first granted the status in 2010 after a huge earthquake devastated the country. The program had been repeatedly extended, with officials citing concerns over ongoing gang violence, political instability, and food shortages in the country. But when the administration announced that it would end the protections for Haitians last June, it asserted that conditions in Haiti had significantly improved. Democrats on Thursday countered that the administration's decision ignored the facts on the ground. Representative Laura Gillen, Democrat of New York and one of the bill's sponsors, called the administration's effort cruel and misguided, pointing to the State Department's own description of the country. The Department of State's website explains that it is too dangerous for American citizens to travel to Haiti because of kidnapping, rampant crime, terrorist activity, civil unrest, and limited health care, Ms. Gillen, whose Long Island district includes a significant Haitian population. How then can we say it's perfectly safe to force Haitians to go back there? House Republicans who voted against the bill maintained that the protections were intended to be temporary and accused Democrats of attempting to provide amnesty for hundreds of thousands of Haitians who they said had come to the country illegally. Echoing Mr. Trump's years of nativist rhetoric, lawmakers contended that Haitian immigrants were draining government resources and accused them of fostering violent crime. More than half of Haitian households are on welfare, said Representative Tom McClintock, Republican of California. That means they're taking from our society, not contributing to it. Representative Brandon Gill, Republican of Texas, said that American citizens were tired of sending their kids to schools where an unlimited number of children are speaking foreign languages. But Representative Ayanna S. Presley, Democrat of Massachusetts, accused her Republican colleagues of misrepresenting the Haitian population. I will not stand by idly while our Haitian neighbors are denigrated, dehumanized, criticized, or forced to live in fear of deportation, she said. First statewide ban on data centers is on the verge of becoming law. The Maine legislature approved an 18-month moratorium, but Governor Janet Mills, a Democrat running for Senate, has yet to say whether she will sign it. By Jenna Russell. Lawmakers in Maine this week approved a statewide moratorium on new data centers, the first legislation of its kind in the nation, at a moment when the rapidly expanding artificial intelligence industry is under intense scrutiny. The fate of the moratorium now rests with Governor Janet Mills, a Democrat in a tough primary race for a United States Senate seat. She has 10 days to veto the legislation, sign it into law, or allow it to become law without her signature. At least a half dozen other states are also considering restrictions on how, when, and where data centers may be built. Lawmakers are concerned about the facility's use of water and electricity, the risks of pollution, and the potential to drive up household energy costs, among other criticisms. The pushback comes as the Trump administration is pressuring states to stay out of regulation of AI. President Trump has threatened to sue states and withhold funding if they pass laws restricting the industry's growth. We remain in the earliest days of this technological revolution and are in a race with adversaries for supremacy within it, an executive order signed by Mr. Trump in December said. To win, United States AI companies must be free to innovate without cumbersome regulation, but excessive state regulation thwarts this imperative. Data centers contain computer servers used to store, process, and transmit digital data. They require large amounts of electricity to run the equipment and large amounts of water to cool the heat it produces. The Maine legislation would pause for 18 months approvals of new data centers that require more than 20 megawatts of power. It would also establish a study group to examine the impact of such facilities and recommend legislative guardrails. Separate legislation, also approved, would make data centers ineligible for certain business tax exemptions. Both legislative chambers are controlled by Democrats. In Maine, a rural state hard hit by mill closures, limiting economic development, even temporarily, is complicated. Before the legislature finalized the measure, Governor Mills said that she would sign it if the pause included an exemption for a proposed data center in the rural town of Jay, which lost more than 200 jobs when its largest employer, a paper mill, shut down in 2023. The project in Jay, which has been welcomed by local officials, would take over the vacant mill property and tap its existing infrastructure, an approach that proponents said should be treated differently than new construction sites on open land. Developers have said it would use a tiny fraction of the water once used by the mill, with no wastewater discharge to the Androscoggin River, while providing millions of dollars in tax revenue. I have to believe that sites like ours are where you would want data centers, said Shiloh Lafreniere, the town manager in Jay, which has a population of 4,680 people and sits northwest of Augusta. It's not creating any impact that wasn't there already. An amendment that would have allowed projects like Jay's to proceed was defeated in the House, 115 to 29. Construction had been slated to begin in July. Melanie Sachs, a Democratic state representative from Freeport who sponsored the data center legislation, said she understood the concerns in Jay. She grew up nearby and her father worked in its mill. She said the legislation would provide a thoughtful process to ensure that developments are safe for residents. It would also provide clarity to data center operators about their obligations. We have evidence from other states telling us to plan carefully because of negative impacts, including noise, light, emissions, spikes in the power grid, she said. This bill is to make sure we meet the moment. In California, legislators enacted regulations for AI companies last year. Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, followed up last month with a groundbreaking executive order that added new requirements for privacy and transparency. But in New Hampshire, where the legislature is under Republican control, lawmakers last month rejected a proposed one-year moratorium on data centers. In Vermont, the Democratic-controlled legislature is still weighing precautions. Governor Maura Healey of Massachusetts, a Democrat, has shown openness to the industry, recently telling business leaders that the state needs to build AI infrastructure to drive economic innovation. As state leaders debate their options, public opinion polls show widespread skepticism about artificial intelligence among younger generations. Still, the growth of AI is inevitable, and data centers will be built somewhere, said Tony McDonald, one of the developers of the project in Jay. People are afraid of AI. I'm afraid of AI. But guess what? It's coming, he said. Ms. Lafreniere, the town manager in Jay, said the paper mill's closure has rippled through the region, hurting loggers who had supplied it and small family businesses that had served its workers. Critics who say data centers do not hire enough workers underestimate the depth of need in places like Jay, she said. In a small community in rural Maine, even a few dozen jobs can be significant, Ms. Lafreniere said. I don't have a lot of new employers coming in. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. ICE arrests 85-year-old French widow who married her GI sweetheart. After Marie-Thérèse Ross Mahé's husband died, an inheritance battle exploded. Her stepson then used his influence to have her arrested, an Alabama probate judge said. By Nicholas Bogle Burrows and Catherine Porter. A few years ago, Marie-Thérèse Ross Mahé reconnected with a man named Bill Ross, whom she had met when she was a young secretary and he was stationed in France for the U.S. military. Both widowed and in their 80s, the two fell in love, and last year she moved more than 4,000 miles to Anniston, Alabama to marry him. But the continent-spanning love story soured in January after Mr. Ross died, setting off an ugly inheritance battle between his two sons and Ms. Ross Mahé, 85. This month, immigration agents arrested her in her nightgown at her late husband's home, and a county probate judge overseeing his estate said that one of his sons was responsible for the arrest. Ms. Ross Mahé is now in a detention center hundreds of miles away in Louisiana, her own 3 children back in France unable to reach her and fearing for her health. The Calhoun County probate judge, Shirley A. Millwood, a Republican elected in 2024, in a Friday ruling urged the federal government to investigate, especially in light of the ongoing national events surrounding the distrust of federal law enforcement officers and the many investigations ongoing of corruption within our government. In her ruling, she appointed an independent administrator for Mr. Ross's estate and temporarily ordered his sons to give up their keys to their father's home. The ruling has not been previously reported. Judge Millwood wrote in her ruling that she believed that Mr. Ross's younger son, Tony Ross, who she said was a retired Alabama state trooper, now working at a federal courthouse in Anniston, had used his position as a government employee to have Ms. Ross Mahé arrested. The son testified in probate court that he had not asked co-workers to have Ms. Ross Mahé arrested, but, Judge Millwood wrote, law enforcement officers told Tony Ross a day before Ms. Ross Mahé's arrest that she would be detained, and he also received a text confirming the arrest less than an hour after it happened. 2 hours after her arrest, the judge wrote, Mr. Ross's other son, Gary, went to their father's house and changed the locks. Judge Millwood directed that copies of her ruling be sent to the presiding judge in Anniston, as well as to the top U.S. Marshal for the region, possibly in an effort to prompt an investigation into the son's behavior. Mr. Ross's sons, who are in their 50s, did not respond to requests for comment, and neither did their lawyer in the inheritance case. Ms. Ross Mahé said in a court filing before her arrest that she had been trying to gain American citizenship. The Homeland Security Department said in an unsigned statement only that Ms. Mahé had overstayed a 90-day visa by roughly 4 months and was arrested by immigration and customs enforcement agents. One of Ms. Ross Mahé's sons said his mother first became acquainted with Mr. Ross in the late 1950s while working at a military base in western France. Mr. Ross later married one of her friends, returning to the United States with her and beginning a life in Alabama. Ms. Ross Mahé married too and had 3 children, but many decades later, after both of their spouses died, the long-lost friends struck up a long-distance romance. She visited Alabama, and he visited the Nantes area where she lived, meeting her family. The children found it slightly awkward that their mother had fallen in love again so quickly, but they were glad that she was finding a second youth, said her son, who asked not to be identified out of fear of affecting his mother's case. And so Ms. Ross Mahé gave up her life in western France and her pension to live in Anniston, a city of about 21,000 people not far from the Talladega race car track. The couple married civilly in April 2025 and had a religious ceremony that summer, which her children watched online from France. The house Mr. Ross had owned for nearly 50 years became home base, with its backyard pool, brick exterior, and manicured lawn. The pair explored parks, drove to Florida, and had plans to visit Louisiana too, Ms. Ross Mahé's son said. But on January 24th, Mr. Ross died unexpectedly of natural causes at 85. The dispute over his possessions, the one-story home worth about $173,000, as well as 2 cars and a bank account holding about $1,500, began shortly after. In Alabama, probate judges oversee many administrative matters, including wills, and Judge Millwood is handling the inheritance dispute because Mr. Ross did not leave one. Under Alabama's inheritance laws, for people who die without a will, Ms. Ross Mahay would be entitled to half of Mr. Ross's estate, and his children would split the other half. But Tony Ross testified that Ms. Ross Mahay had said, while she was married to his father, that if he died, she did not want anything of his, but would need to be able to fly back to France. After his death, the sons sent Ms. Mahay an offer of $10,000 if she waived her right to any inheritance. Ms. Ross Mahay and the judge described more aggressive approaches. The day after Mr. Ross died, his sons came to the house and each drove off with one of his vehicles, a truck and a 2019 Mercedes-Benz, according to Judge Millwood. Mr. Ross's sons denied removing other pieces of property and countered that Ms. Mahay had removed, concealed, or disposed of certain assets herself. They also said she had told them she did not want certain things in the house, guns and Mr. Ross's dog, but had later claimed that the sons had taken them unfairly. Ms. Ross Mahay said in a court filing last month that the older of Mr. Ross's sons, Gary Ross, had rerouted all mail sent to his father's home, which caused her to miss an appointment with immigration officials. Because of her citizenship status, Ms. Ross Mahay said, she was not on her husband's checking account and did not have access to money to pay for food, clothing, or utilities. Her son said the internet, utilities, and cable had been turned off at the home. On March 30th, Judge Millwood issued an order temporarily prohibiting all of Mr. Ross's family members from selling or giving away any of his assets. 2 days later, on April 1st, ICE agents came to the home on quiet Gann Drive and arrested Ms. Ross Mahay, dressed only in her nightgown, robe, and underwear, according to a neighbor's account filed in court. Her son said he had been unable to contact his mother since her arrest because the detention center where she is held does not accept international phone calls. Instead, she has been communicating through her neighbors in Anniston, who have rallied around her cause. The French consulate has also been working to free her. According to Ms. Ross Mahay's son, she has told her neighbors that other people being held at the detention center have been taking care of her, offering her covers at night and calling her Unsinkable Molly, after Margaret Brown, a survivor of the Titanic. And sticking with ICE agent charged with assault after motorists say he brandished gun. Minnesota prosecutors have spent weeks investigating the conduct of immigration agents who took part in an immigration crackdown in the Twin Cities. This is the first case they have brought. By Sheila M. Eldred, Ernesto Londoño, and Julie Bozeman. Prosecutors in Minneapolis on Thursday charged a federal immigration agent with assault, accusing the agent of pointing a gun at motorists along a state highway during the immigration crackdown in the Twin Cities in February. It was a rare instance of state prosecutors charging a federal agent for on-duty actions, and the first such case, officials said, connected to the federal government's 10-week operation in Minnesota. The prosecutor in Hennepin County, Mary Moriarty, described the assault case as one of 18 incidents involving federal agents now under investigation by her office and indicated that charges against other agents were possible. The agent, Gregory Donald Morgan, Jr., of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, pointed a gun at 2 people in a car as he attempted to pass them in an unmarked vehicle on the shoulder of a highway, according to the criminal complaint. Driving while pointing a weapon out of your moving vehicle at the victims who are in another vehicle could have led to yet another disastrous incident in a community that has already suffered too many, Ms. Moriarty told reporters. The Department of Homeland Security did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Mr. Morgan, who faces 2 counts of second-degree assault, could not be reached for comment, and it was not clear if he had retained a lawyer. After the incident, Mr. Morgan, 35, told state investigators that he feared for his safety and the safety of others after a vehicle swerved in front of him and cut him off, according to the state complaint. Mr. Morgan told the investigators that the events took place as he was nearing the end of his shift and driving back to a federal building to get gas. State prosecutors face formidable practical and legal obstacles in pursuing criminal charges against federal agents. Federal agents also have broad immunity from prosecution in state court for on-duty conduct. State officials also say the federal government has refused to provide local investigators with basic information, including the names of agents in many cases. Still, Minnesota prosecutors have spent weeks investigating actions of federal agents who took part in the crackdown, known as Operation Metro Surge, which led to near-daily clashes between agents and residents. Law enforcement officials have said their review includes the fatal shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, two American citizens who were killed during confrontations with agents in separate incidents in January. Local officials have also said they were weighing charges against federal agents involved in a Minneapolis shooting that wounded a Venezuelan immigrant and in the arrest of an American citizen who was ordered out of his home in frigid weather wearing only his underwear. Ms. Moriarty said that the case announced on Thursday had virtually none of the obstacles that have made prosecuting other cases relating to the immigration surge in the Twin Cities so complex. In this case, prosecutors were able to interview both the motorists and the ICE agents in the vehicle and collect video evidence from highway cameras and a victim's cell phone. Both Mr. Morgan and his partner voluntarily gave interviews to investigators. The incident unfolded late in the afternoon on February 5th on a traffic-choked highway near Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. The motorists told investigators that they were in the right lane of the highway when they saw a black SUV approaching at a high speed on the highway's shoulder. With no markings on the SUV, the motorists said they had no idea that the people inside it were law enforcement agents. There were no lights or sirens, the motorists said. The driver of the car, in an attempt to cut him off a little bit, edged his car into the shoulder, causing the SUV to slow down, then return to the legal traffic lane. At that point, the SUV, driven by Mr. Morgan, pulled alongside the car, and Mr. Morgan, wearing a black T-shirt, rolled down his window and pointed a handgun at the victims, yelling something that they could not hear, according to the complaint. Mr. Morgan told authorities that he had yelled out, "Police, stop," after drawing his weapon. The motorists, feeling threatened, called 911. During an interview later with state investigators, the driver of the car said that he had not understood that Mr. Morgan was an agent of ICE. Instead, the driver said he had understood that there was a crazy person driving down the road aiming guns at people, according to the complaint. A supervisor for ICE told investigators that neither Mr. Morgan nor his partner reported the incident after they returned to their base. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Senate votes to allow mining near Minnesota wilderness. The move was a victory for a Chilean company that wants to build a copper and nickel mine, which environmentalists say could devastate fragile lakes and forests. By Maxine Joslow. The Senate voted on Thursday to allow mining upstream from Minnesota's Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, one of the largest and most visited expanses of federally protected lakes and forests in the United States. By a vote of 50 to 49, Senators passed a resolution that would repeal a moratorium on new mining across more than 225,000 acres of the Superior National Forest, which includes the Boundary Waters. The House already passed the Republican-led measure, which now heads to President Trump, who is expected to sign it into law. The vote was a victory for Twin Metals Minnesota, a subsidiary of the Chilean mining giant Antofagasta. The company wants to build a copper and nickel mine about 5 miles southwest of the wilderness area, and the Biden administration complicated its plans by banning mining there until 2043. Environmentalists have sought for years to block the proposed mine, saying it could contaminate the region's interconnected lakes and streams with heavy metals, sulfuric acid, and other toxic substances. Native American tribes fear the runoff from mining could devastate a watershed that they rely on for fishing and wild rice harvesting. Fishing and hunting groups have also been opposed. The boundary waters belong to all Americans, said Senator Martin Heinrich, Democrat of New Mexico, in an impassioned speech before the vote. The boundary waters are our public lands, all of ours. President Teddy Roosevelt, who had the incredible foresight to protect this beautiful place, he had it right when he said we should see to it that they are preserved for our children and our children's children forever, with their majestic beauty unmarred. 4 descendants of President Theodore Roosevelt, who established the Superior National Forest in 1909, urged senators to safeguard the landscape in a rare letter in February. As TR said at the Grand Canyon in 1903, we now reiterate with the boundary waters today. Leave it as it is, said the letter, which was organized by Ted Roosevelt IV, an investment banker and great-grandson of Theodore Roosevelt. The boundary waters' boreal forests provide crucial habitat for hundreds of species, including the black bear, Canada lynx, and gray wolf. Its lakes are home to one of the largest concentrations of lake trout in the contiguous United States. Deep underground lies another kind of riches, an estimated 4 billion tons of copper and nickel ore. The area is believed to hold one of the world's largest undeveloped mineral deposits. The U.S. Forest Service in 2016 and again in 2022 concluded that the proposed mine posed significant risks, including potential water and soil contamination. A study by Harvard researchers also found that such contamination could harm the region's economy by discouraging tourism and outdoor recreation. Senate Republicans introduced the resolution to allow mining in the area under the Congressional Review Act of 1996, which lets lawmakers reverse recent federal regulations with a simple majority vote. Ahead of the vote, many Democrats and legal experts argued that the moratorium on mining was not a regulation, and thus the 1996 law did not apply. 2 Republicans, Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina and Senator Susan Collins of Maine, joined Democrats to vote against the resolution. The only senator who did not cast a vote was Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri. Senator Tillis said in an interview that he objected to such an expansive use of the Congressional Review Act. I think we are setting a precedent here, he said, adding some of my colleagues are going to live to regret it. Kathy Grahl, a spokeswoman for Twin Metals Minnesota, said in an email that the company was very appreciative of the senators who supported the resolution. She rejected the notion that the proposed mine would cause ecological damage, saying it would comply with Minnesota's strict standards on water quality. The Biden administration, Ms. Grahl said, locked out a significant domestic source of critical minerals, which are needed now more than ever. Copper is a crucial component in countless products, including cell phones, electric vehicles, and military aircraft. The United States is heavily reliant on copper imported from Chile, Canada, and other countries. Conservationists said they were open to new domestic mining, but not in such a pristine place. 2 things can be true. You can support domestic mining and also oppose this mine, given the location of it, said Corey Fisher, a former wilderness ranger in the Boundary Waters, who is now the public lands director at Trout Unlimited, a conservation group. Senator Tina Smith, Democrat of Minnesota, said the move was the opposite of the America First strategy promised by Mr. Trump. It's creating a path for this Chilean mining conglomerate to pollute the Boundary Waters, take the copper, and send it to China, Ms. Smith said in a recent interview in her office, which is decorated with a wooden sign from an entrance to the Boundary Waters. Twin Metals has said it hasn't yet decided where to send the copper extracted from Minnesota for processing. As of last year, China controlled more than half of global copper refining, according to data from Benchmark Mineral Intelligence, a research firm. The fight over whether to allow mining near the Boundary Waters has prompted political whiplash in Washington for more than a decade. The Obama administration began an environmental review of a potential 20-year moratorium on mining in the region in 2016. The first Trump administration called off the review in 2018 and renewed federal leases critical to Twin Metals' proposed mine in 2019. The moves came after the Chilean billionaire Andrónico Luksic, whose family controlled the mining giant Antofagasta, rented a house in Washington to Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, and her husband, Jared Kushner. Ethics experts raised concerns about the rental deal. Representatives for Mr. Luksic called it a standard real estate transaction that happened to involve the president's family. After President Joseph R. Biden Jr. took office, his administration canceled the federal leases in 2022 and imposed the 20-year ban on mining in much of the Superior National Forest in 2023. Mr. Luksic stepped down from Antofagasta's board of directors in January, while his family maintains a majority stake through its holding company. The vote on Thursday increased the chances that Twin Metals Minnesota would build the mine, though the project still faces other obstacles, including expected legal battles and the need to obtain federal leases and state permits. 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon goes into effect. The pause in the fighting between Israeli forces and Iranian-allied Hezbollah militants may help smooth the way to a peace deal between the U.S. and Iran. By Ewan Ward, Isabel Kirshner, Eric Schmidt, and Thomas Fuller. A 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon went into effect on Friday, a pause in fighting that has the potential to remove a major hurdle in the broader peace talks between Iran and the United States. President Trump announced the ceasefire hours earlier, saying that he had spoken to the leaders of both countries and that he would invite them to the White House for meaningful talks. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed the agreement, and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam of Lebanon said his country welcomed the ceasefire. At an impromptu news conference later Thursday, Mr. Trump said he was optimistic that he could reach a separate peace agreement with Iran, which has called for Lebanon to be part of any long-term deal to end the war there. He said he might travel to Pakistan if a deal was signed there. Mr. Trump also said he would consider extending the ceasefire now in effect with Iran if a broader agreement appeared near. But with the fate of both ceasefires intertwined, the outlook for the one in Lebanon remained shrouded in uncertainty. The talks that led to the agreement between Israel and Lebanon's governments did not involve Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militant group that Israel is fighting. Although Hezbollah has signaled that it will abide by the truce, Lebanon's government has little control over the group, which it has accused of operating at Tehran's behest. Mr. Netanyahu presented the ceasefire as an opening for diplomacy to forge what he called a historic peace agreement with Lebanon. But he emphasized that progress depended on the disarmament of Hezbollah, a goal that has long eluded Israel and the Lebanese government. Rocket fire and drone launches toward northern Israel continued up until the final minutes before the ceasefire came into effect at midnight local time, and the Israeli military said it was striking launchers from which the rockets were fired. In the previous 24 hours, the military struck what it described as more than 380 Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, it said. The ceasefire deal came after a long day of negotiating. At one point before it was announced, according to one Lebanese official, Lebanon's president, Joseph Aoun, rebuffed attempts by the Trump administration to agree to a phone call with Mr. Netanyahu. Mr. Trump provided the time frame for the truce, 10 days, but little clarity on the terms or what is expected of the two sides. Last month, after coming under fire from Hezbollah, Israel invaded a broad area of southern Lebanon, which it still controls. Hundreds of thousands of Lebanese have been expelled from their homes, and a major question is when, or if, they will be able to return. Mr. Netanyahu said Israeli troops would remain in Lebanon in an expanded security zone in southern Lebanon. "This is where we are located," he said. "We are not leaving." Hezbollah's media office said in a statement that a ceasefire must be comprehensive across all Lebanese territory and that it would not allow Israeli forces any freedom of movement. It said that the group's actions would be based on how developments unfold. A ceasefire in the war against Iran that the United States and Israel launched in late February took effect last week, but expires on April 21st. Pakistani mediators are seeking to restart direct talks between Washington and Tehran, and on Thursday met with Iran's top negotiator and Speaker of its parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. The United States, which has sought to pressure Iran in the negotiations by blockading Iranian ports, depriving Tehran of crucial oil revenues, signaled a broadening of the blockade on Thursday. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said U.S. military commanders elsewhere in the world, including in the Indo-Pacific region, will actively pursue any Iranian-flagged vessel or any vessel attempting to provide material support to Iran. Closer to Iran, U.S. Central Command said Thursday that 14 vessels had turned around at the direction of U.S. forces to comply with the blockade. General Kane made the comments during a Pentagon briefing in which Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth seemed to be directly trying to persuade Iran's leaders that their best option was to agree to a deal. He renewed the Trump administration's threat to attack Iran's electrical infrastructure and said that the U.S. military was maximally postured to restart combat operations. "While you are digging out, we are only getting stronger," Mr. Hegseth said. "You can move things around, but you can't actually rebuild." But the Trump administration is under pressure of its own, including domestically. The average price of gasoline remains $1 higher per gallon than before the war, and economists are warning of a return to higher inflation as November's midterm elections approach. The war, which has been unpopular from the start among the American public, is facing increased scrutiny in Congress. The White House Budget Director, Russell T. Vought, came under sharp questioning on Thursday by Senate Democrats over its cost. House Republicans on Thursday narrowly blocked a challenge to Mr. Trump's authority to continue combat operations in Iran. Internationally, the war is threatening to slow economic growth as the blockage of energy exports from the Gulf causes acute shortages of oil and gas. Airlines in Europe and Asia have warned of shortages of jet fuel and have cut hundreds of flights from their schedules. A resumption of Gulf oil supplies to the global market appears far from imminent. In the 3 days since the United States imposed its blockade on Iranian ports, the U.S. Navy has made clear that the movement restrictions do not apply to vessels not connected with Iran. Yet overall traffic in the Strait of Hormuz remains very limited, according to Kepler, a maritime data firm. The security threat level in the strait remains critical, according to an advisory note from the UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre, which is administered by the British Royal Navy. America's allies in Europe have declined to take part in the U.S. blockade on Iran and have been sharply critical of the human toll in the war in Lebanon that broke out shortly after the U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran began. More than 2,000 people have been killed in Lebanon since fighting there resumed, the Lebanese authorities say. The State Department said in a statement Thursday that the 10-day period in the Israeli-Lebanon truce could be extended by the mutual consent of the two countries, provided that Lebanon effectively demonstrates its ability to assert its sovereignty. The department did not make the metrics for success on that front clear. Lebanon's government has long struggled to curb Hezbollah, a group considered to be more powerful than the country's own military. Israel will preserve its right to self-defense against planned attacks, the statement said, but will not carry out any offensive operations against Lebanese targets by land, sea, and air. The truce has many detractors inside Israel. Avigdor Lieberman, a right-wing opposition party leader, called it a betrayal of the residents of northern Israel in a post on social media. The prime minister also faced criticism over the ceasefire from within his own conservative Likud party. Mr. Netanyahu also listed some of the challenges of reaching a peace deal in the conflict. He noted that Hezbollah still retained rockets in its arsenal. "We will have to deal with that too," he said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Russian strikes kill at least 18 in biggest barrage on Ukrainian cities in months. Moscow is again ramping up missile and drone attacks on civilian targets, dispelling any notion that a temporary ceasefire for Orthodox Easter might become more lasting. By Kim Barker and Alexandra Mikoloshin. Russia launched a vast missile and drone attack across Ukraine overnight and early Thursday morning, killing at least 18 people and destroying any thought that the temporary Easter truce announced by President Vladimir V. Putin meant anything more permanent. The strikes sent plumes of smoke above the capital, Kyiv, in the early morning and also targeted the port city of Odessa and the central eastern city of Dnipro. Bone-rattling explosions of air defense interceptors and ballistic missiles hitting their targets jarred residents out of bed. Russia sent 659 drones and 44 missiles, including 19 ballistic ones, into Ukrainian cities from 7 a.m. on Wednesday to 7 a.m. on Thursday, according to the Ukrainian Air Force. It was the largest such barrage in months, and one of the largest of the war. In Kyiv, 4 people were killed, including a 12-year-old boy, and 48 other people were injured, according to the mayor, Vitaly Klitschko. He added on social media at 5 a.m. Kyiv time that Russian strikes had also injured 4 medics who had been responding to an earlier attack at an office building. A drone punched a hole in the side of a multi-story apartment building shortly after Olena Kapustyan, 41, started getting her 11-year-old son ready for school on Thursday. She said in an interview that she had been listening as air defenses tried to intercept the drone, then watched it pass the corridor window of her 16th floor apartment and then come straight at her building. It was like a comet, she said. The explosion tore through the upper floors, blowing out windows, flinging open cabinets and doors, and leaving a gaping hole in the facade. It was the second time the building had been hit. The last strike was in March 2025, causing a fire. Ms. Kapustyan said she no longer tried to make sense of the war. "We pray every day for it to end," she said. "We want our children to live, to see life, not shelters and sirens." Elsewhere, at least 9 people were killed in Odessa, 4 in the Dnipropetrovsk region and 1 in Kharkiv, officials said. Peace negotiations over the war in Ukraine, now in its 5th year, have stalled since February, largely because of the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran. After repeated calls by President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine for a ceasefire over Orthodox Easter, Mr. Putin announced one last week. It was the 2nd year in a row that Mr. Putin has called for a temporary truce. Both the Ukrainian and Russian sides, as they did last year, accused each other of repeatedly violating the ceasefire, which Mr. Putin said would last 32 hours. The reported assaults occurred along the front lines. Cities were spared any major attacks. The intense assault on Wednesday night and early Thursday indicated that Russia was again ramping up attacks on civilian targets, including by using ballistic missiles. Ukraine can knock down those weapons only with American-designed Patriot interceptors. Kyiv has repeatedly asked the West for more Patriots, but there is a limited supply worldwide, and many have been used by Western allies in the spillover from the war in Iran. In an interview on Tuesday with ZDF, a German broadcaster, Mr. Zelensky said that Ukraine's deficit of Patriots can't get any worse. Still, in the overnight attacks, Ukraine managed to destroy 8 of the ballistic missiles, according to the Ukrainian Air Force. It also knocked down 636 of the drones, the military said. Woe to those who manipulate religion, Pope says amid standoff with Trump. For days, Pope Leo XIV has attracted criticism from President Trump and his allies for refusing to back the war in Iran. On Thursday, he reiterated his calls for peace. By Motoko Rich. Pope Leo XIV is not backing down. Amid a growing dispute with the Trump administration over the legitimacy of American attacks in Iran, Leo used a speech on Thursday in Cameroon to express woe to those who manipulate religion and the very name of God for their own military, economic, and political gain, dragging that which is sacred into darkness and filth. Blessed are the peacemakers, he said, adding, "The world is being ravaged by a handful of tyrants, yet it is held together by a multitude of supportive brothers and sisters." The Pope was speaking in a region of Cameroon where separatists have been clashing with the government for a decade, and he praised local religious leaders seeking to end that conflict. But against the backdrop of American efforts to use Christian theology to justify the Iran campaign, the Pope's words seemed as directed at the Trump administration as they were at separatist leaders and the government of Paul Biya, 93, the world's oldest president and an authoritarian who has ruled Cameroon for more than 40 years. The Trump administration has sought to portray its war in Iran as a just war backed by the will of God and Jesus Christ. Pope Leo has stridently disagreed, saying previously that Jesus does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war. That led to an extraordinary broadside on Sunday from Mr. Trump, who attacked the Pope on social media as terrible on foreign policy. On Monday, as the Pope left for a tour through 4 countries in Africa, he said he had no fear of the Trump administration and would continue to protest war and speak out loudly about the message of the gospel. The Trump administration continued to needle him, with Vice President J.D. Vance saying on Tuesday that Leo should be more careful when he talks about matters of theology. On Wednesday, the Pope traveled to Cameroon, where he immediately spoke against the authoritarian rule of President Biya. In a speech at the presidential palace on Wednesday, Leo said that public authorities are called to serve as bridges, never as sources of division, and that authentic peace arises when everyone feels protected, heard, and respected, when the law serves as a secure safeguard against the whims of the rich and powerful. On Thursday, Leo traveled to Bamenda, an English-speaking region of Cameroon, which is led by a French-speaking national government. A violent secessionist movement centered in Bamenda has divided the country over the past decade. Although the Pope has not referred specifically to Mr. Trump or his administration since Monday, his words in Bamenda seemed to extend beyond local conflicts in Cameroon. The masters of war, he said, pretend not to know that it takes only a moment to destroy, yet often a lifetime is oft not enough to rebuild. They turn a blind eye to the fact that billions of dollars are spent on killing and devastation. More young men say religion is very important to them, poll finds. I wanted something new and something traditional and something that felt holy. By Ruth Igilnik and Ruth Graham. For several years, many pastors across the country have noticed young adults, especially men, filling their pews. Leaders have welcomed these new worshipers, even if their arrival has remained something of a mystery. A new Gallup survey adds muscle to those anecdotal reports. The poll finds a sharp rise in the share of men under 30 who say that religion is very important to them, 42% in 2025, from 28% in 2023. Scholars, activists, and faith leaders have hotly debated whether the phenomenon is real and lasting. Some have brushed it away as a blip, and others have celebrated it as a revival. Gallup's survey, which combined polling data across multiple years, seems to confirm that young men are indeed becoming more religious. But it has found that religion is dropping in importance among young women, widening a surprising gender gap for young adults. For decades, surveys have found that women are consistently more religious than their male peers. As a teenager living outside Houston, Mason Grubser found himself increasingly disillusioned by a life that seemed to revolve around scrolling through his phone. All my entertainment is right here in front of me, but there's no fulfillment from that, Mr. Grubser said. I wanted something new and something traditional and something that felt holy. He found what he was looking for at the Catholic Center on campus at Texas A&M University, where he is a petroleum engineering major. Now 21, Mr. Grubser has been a confirmed Catholic for 2 years and is engaged to be married. He attends Mass once or twice a week. What I was really looking for, and still am, was purpose, he said. The Church definitely provides that. He is far from alone. Catholic dioceses across the country are reporting an influx of people joining the Church. Attendance and membership at many Orthodox churches are also rising, a shift driven in large part by young men. Bible sales are surging. Last year, a major national survey from Pew Research Center found that the Christian population in the United States had recently stabilized after a long period of decline, in part because of young adults. Adults born between 2000 and 2006, the survey's youngest cohort, were no less likely to identify as religious than those in the cohort just above them. The new Gallup survey also suggests that the decline in American religiosity seems to be leveling off. The survey has also found that young women, ages 18 to 29, are now the least religious across all age groups by far. They are less than half as likely as women over 65 to say religion is very important in their lives. The reverse gender gap among young adults is a very powerful historical finding, said Frank Newport, and one of the authors of the study. One of the most long-lasting and seemingly permanent findings in the study of religion going back to the 1950s was that women were more religious than men, Mr. Newport added. The reasons for the growing gender gap are complex, but the split mirrors a similar divide in their politics. Christian identity in particular has become increasingly associated with right-wing political beliefs. Bailey Gregory was raised in a conservative evangelical church where her father worked as a musician. She joined a more progressive denomination as an adult and enrolled in seminary to pursue being a pastor. But she realized along the way that she did not feel at home in church anymore, in part because of her experiences feeling subtly unwelcome as a disabled person. "I don't see myself in the church. I don't see the things I enjoy in the church," said Ms. Gregory, 36, who now lives in Baltimore. She still considers herself a Christian, but rarely attends services these days. She said that many of her female friends, who became more politically active in recent years, followed a similar trajectory. The survey suggests that much of the growth in religiosity is concentrated among Republicans. More than half of young Republican men and women say they attend religious services at least monthly, an increase over the last several years. And while the numbers of Democrats are much lower, religious attendance for young men in that group has also ticked a few percentage points upward since 2023. Young Democratic women were the only group not to see an increase in religious attendance. The broader story of American religion remains one of continued decline, and some experts question the claim that the country is undergoing a spiritual revival that would meaningfully shift that trajectory. Young adults today remain significantly less likely to identify as Christians than their grandparents' generation, and according to Pew, more than a quarter of American adults, 28%, now claim no religious identity at all. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, April 17th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chris Wilhelm. Thank you for listening.